Welcome to Mid-Century Living, your weekly nostalgia podcast about the best of technology and culture from the mid-20th century.
Hi everyone, it's Jackie from Mid-Century Living. Gonzalo and I are still on vacation, but we have a special bonus episode for you today. Longtime listeners may remember that we spent 2 episodes covering the history of Disneyland back in Season 1. Well, we put them together into a special supercut for you. The Disneyland episodes were 2 of my favorite episodes we ever released. If you already listened to the originals, I hope you enjoy this new edit. And if you're new to the show, this will be a great way to hear lots of fun Disney history with a little less of our chit-chat. We cover everything from Walt Disney's earliest inspiration all the way through to about 1966. So without further ado, here's the history of Disneyland Park. So here we go. We will start with inspiration. So Walt Disney, the man, was born in 1901, and his boyhood home in Missouri had this bustling main street that he loved, and that later provided the inspiration for Disneyland's Main Street USA. He, growing up, was always looking for ideas and inspiration from everything around him, and when he took his daughters to ride the carousel in the Griffith Park in LA, he started imagining what a clean and safe and family-friendly place where parents and children could have fun together could be like. Amusement parks back then were not really quite up to the standards of amusement parks we're used to today. So he had this idea of it being just like a safe place for everyone, but also fun for the adults and the kids. Usually, back then, adults were just sitting at the park, like, watching their kids hang out and do things, but he wanted something that was going to be fun for everybody. He looked for ideas and inspiration from other places around LA, like Knott's Berry Farm and the Spanish colonial-style shops on Olvera Street and the Farmer's Market, which is one of his favorite hangouts. And started kind of piecing together the idea of this Mickey Mouse Park.
I like you called it Mickey Mouse Park, which is funny because, well, not funny, but it's interesting because the first documented plan for the park is in a little memo from Walt to the production designer Dick Kelsey, where he referred to it as Mickey Mouse Park.
Yes, I think that was actually what he technically was thinking of calling it at the time. Starting around 1950 is when he started shopping this idea around, and he started touring around other different theme parks. 2 in particular that inspired him greatly were the Tivoli Gardens in Denmark and Children's Fairyland in Oakland, California. The Tivoli Gardens Park opened in 1843 and is the 3rd oldest operating amusement park in the world.
Wait, today?
Yes. It's still open.
Oh, wow.
And it's the 2nd most popular seasonal amusement park in the world, and also the 5th most visited amusement park in Europe.
Wow.
Children's Fairyland was built in 1950 in Oakland, California, and Disney actually hired the first director of Fairyland to work at Disneyland as a youth director, and she actually worked there from the park's opening until 1972. Oh. So this was sort of Walt's style, as he would kind of recruit people that he thought were brilliant to work on his projects, and that's sort of how WED Enterprises came to be. So he handpicked a group of studio staff and other artists from both his other companies and from Walt Disney Studios and from other places around. He referred to them as Imagineers, which combined the word imagination and engineering.
Oh, Imagineers, like today, because we call that still, they're still called Imagineers.
Yes, they are still called Imagineers. You'll notice as I go through this history that a lot of these terms that Walt coined, they still use today. Some things have been reworded. You could actually tell a true Disney fan based on the vocabulary they used. Like if you know what WED Enterprises is, for example, because it's not a thing anymore.
I did not know what it was. When you said it earlier when we were going over the outline, I was like, wed, like, I don't know. In my mind, it was like wed, like married.
No, it's actually Walt Disney's initials. Walter Elias Disney is what WED Enterprises stands for. But it was
Okay.
originally formed as Walt Disney Inc., with an engineering division tasked specifically with designing Disneyland. The idea was having everyone who was working on Disneyland under one organization to make it easier for them to collaborate each other. He renamed WDI to WED Enterprises in 1953, which was, again, his initials. This company was owned privately by Walt from its beginnings in 1952 through to 1965, when it eventually merged with the Walt Disney Company. So it was supposed to function as a separate organization from the rest of the company, but as Imagineers were repeatedly recruited to create sets for live-action movies, the two companies sort of became closer together until eventually it just made more sense financially to merge them. So it's actually just part of the Walt Disney Company now, and that's why WED Enterprises is no longer a company title, so you can tell who the real fans are if they know what it is.
Ah, interesting. So originally we were going to have WED Enterprises just for the park, so like two separate things.
Yep.
Okay.
So once he has this group of geniuses together working on this theme park, then it becomes time to raise money. So since it was this crazy idea at the time, he had a little difficulty obtaining funding, so Walt had to think outside the box and decided to use television to get the idea into people's home. So at this point, it was a new medium he was taking a risk on, but he considered it his way of going direct to the public, quote unquote, and created a TV show called Disneyland, which aired on ABC, and in return, ABC television network agreed to help finance the new park. So that's where he got a lot of his money from. So the Disneyland TV show premiered on October 27th, 1954, and contained weekly glimpses of Disneyland Park being built, and occasionally other Disney shorts and stuff like that.
So has ABC always owned Disney? Because I know that, oh, maybe I'm wrong, but don't they own Disneyland now?
They are, actually, I think Disney owns ABC now, but they've
It's
been
the other way
working
around.
together
Okay.
this long, yes.
Wow.
Yeah, they've always been partners.
So what was the show about, do you know?
Yes, so it was usually, they would open with a clip of Disneyland being built and like progress reports, and then end with Disney shorts or Mickey Mouse cartoons or clips from movies or whole movies in black and white originally, and then eventually in color. Basically, the same show still runs today. It's appeared on different titles. Currently, the version of the show is The Wonderful World of Disney, which is the current incarnation of the series. Another
Cool.
place that he procured funding from was, he needed a railroad. Walt always loved railroads and trains. That was always a huge passion of his. So he got a sponsorship deal so that Disneyland could have a railroad. It was a company called the Addison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railway, AT&SF. And so the Disneyland Railroad was originally called the Santa Fe and Disneyland Railroad, until the sponsorship deal ended in 1974. So now they have the money, so it's time to work on designing the theme park. So Walt's genius is shown. A lot of the things that now seem normal to us in theme park designs were not normal at all, and Disney himself just kind of came up with all of these ideas on his own. So some unique design ideas that were Walt's idea, and you can see in all of the Disney parks and some other theme parks that sort of copied him later, are the concept of a single entrance. So Walt studied pathways, traffic flow, and entrances and exits at places like fairs, circuses, carnivals, national parks, museums, and even streets in New York City, trying to decide what the most efficient way and the best way to move people through a crowded place like this would be. And he came up with this idea of a single entrance. Amusement park operators at the time argued this would create congestion, but Walt wanted visitors to experience a cohesive story, like walking through scenes of a movie. Another unique idea of his was the concept of a central hub. So there would be something in the middle that would lead out to the park's four lands, like spokes of a wheel. Walt felt that this oriented people and saved steps.
Interesting. Like saving people walking back and forth. Because that's the worst. Like when you're like, oh, I have to go somewhere, and then you walk, and then you realize halfway there, they're like, oh, I'm going the wrong way.
Yes.
I did that this week. I got off the elevator. I was running an errand, and I got off the elevator at the wrong floor, and then I had to like embarrassingly go back into the elevator, push the right button.
You do an awful lot of walking in Disney parks, but it is a lot easier to find your way around because you can always look to the center of the park and figure out where you are in relation to everything else. Another unique design idea of Walt's, which is that every land should have a weenie, is what he called it. An eye-catching central feature that draws people toward a goal. So the main attractor was, of course, Sleeping Beauty Castle, but each individual land also has something drawing you in to the center. And individual lands gets us to one last unique design idea of Walt, which was theming. So Walt insisted that elements in each land fit harmoniously together, from buildings to signs to trash cans. Everything has to establish a cohesive story for each land. Disney trash cans are also fan favorites. They even make little like trash can Christmas ornaments now you can buy, because each individual land, all of the trash cans are themed, the ground is themed. I'm jumping ahead a little bit, but the storytelling, I think, is my favorite part of all of the theming, because it's not just like you're waiting in line some random place and then you get on the ride and that's when the story starts. At Disney parks, the story starts when you step into the line. So even the part where you're waiting in line is themed, and that's where the story starts. And there's, I wish I could think of some original, but the best one that comes to mind for telling a story while you're waiting in line is the Tower of Terror.
I was just thinking the Tower of Terror, because in Disney World, whenever you're going through it, you're going through the hotel. And if you've seen the movie, it looks just like the set.
Yes, and it's like the little details are incredible. I'm much too much of a baby to go on this actual ride. I've gone on it a couple times and I love it to pieces. I just genuinely cannot handle the free falling sensation. So I always take the chicken exit, and I go get a frozen banana while everyone else rides the ride. But I sometimes, if the line is short, I'll just wait in line with everybody because I just enjoy the theming so much. So yeah, it's a hotel, but it's an abandoned hotel. And so, like, there's a phone off the hook on the front desk, and there's cobwebs everywhere. You could see, like, someone knocked over a wine glass on their way out. Like, it looks like a hotel that people left in a hurry a long time ago. Like, the entire thing is beautiful, and it's this beautiful Art Deco hotel that I would have just loved to stay in. But that's the thing. It's, like, also a really nice hotel, but it's a really nice hotel that's clearly not been taken care of in years. And it's you get the entire vibe. And you're starting to feel nervous, like something has gone wrong here, before you even get to the elevator. The whole thing's incredible. Anyway, that's my favorite telling the story ride queue.
Okay.
And you're never bored. There's always something to look at in all of these. So the entire thing, if you're waiting in line forever, you're still in the experience.
Yeah. I think that's exactly what he was going for. It's an experience, not just a theme park.
Correct. And that's what makes the Disney parks so landmark and interesting, and that's why we're devoting 2 episodes to it.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about the layout. Because, like Jackie said, it's layout that can be seen in all of his other parks, and also in some parks that draw their inspiration from Disney. And per design, it's not meant to be a series of attractions just kind of hobbled together. It's meant to be an aesthetically engineered setting, very careful details, goal of a very rich atmosphere, scenes everywhere, so you're always in like a story. And a lot of the original attractions are still there today, and we'll get more on that in part 2. But there's very good descriptions of Walt's original ideas, and there's actually a map rendering from about 1953, and this rendering came from a weekend that Walt and one of his head designers by the name of Herb Ryman did. So Walt wanted to get this idea out, and he's like, you're the only one who can do this. And what Herb did was draw as Walt talked. And the map that came out of this talk is the original map and rendering of Disneyland. And it actually sold at an auction in 2017. I'm not really sure what the final price was, but pre-auction estimate had it at between $750,000 and $1 million. So that should be some sort of indication of how important Disneyland is.
Mm-hmm.
And that central hub idea that Jackie mentioned with the 4 lands with the spokes of the wheel, if you look at it from plan view and you're looking at it kind of like a compass for the 4 cardinal directions, you have at the south, at the bottom, you have the entrance. And then to the east, you have, which is the right, you have Tomorrowland. And then at the top, Fantasyland, which you go to the castle for, and Frontierland to the left. And we also see some stuff to the left in Adventureland, New Orleans Square, and Critter Country. And all these names are very close to what he wanted originally. Fantasyland's original, but Frontierland actually was Frontier Country. Tomorrowland was the World of Tomorrow. Adventureland was True Life Adventureland. And New Orleans Square, which is a very well-known part of Disneyland, actually not originally in his plans. The area where that is at was actually supposed to be made up of Mickey Mouse Club and Lilliputian Island, which I think I'm saying that correctly. But that is actually kind of like a callback to the book Gulliver's Travels, where he goes to the island Lilliput, where everyone is tiny. So we can assume that original plans had him building part of a park in miniature so that guests felt like giants.
That would have been cute.
Yeah. But anyway, the entrance is very much built like his original plan. Walt loved his trains, so the entrance is a train station, and you see 2 little small, not tunnels, really like underpasses leading into Main Street. The iconic Disney flower bed with the Mickey Mouse on it was not originally there, but I think it's a great addition because if you think of Disneyland, in my mind at least, I think the flower bed at the area entrance.
Mm-hmm.
The original castle was meant to curve around the courtyard with a carousel at its center, but the actual castle ended up being styled after Sleeping Beauty, and there's a drawbridge / tunnel at its center that you go through. And if you're standing at the center of the spokes, you can kind of still see a carousel, because instead of the carousel being part of the castle, it's a centerpiece at Fantasyland, which is just beyond the castle. So some pieces of the map remain unchanged when they were built. For example, the placement of Frontierland River, Mark Twain's riverboat are just as described in the map, which actually the riverboat is pretty cool. I don't remember, but it's the first that's built in so many years.
Actually, 50. It's an actual functioning riverboat, and the first one built in the United States in 50 years at the time it was built. It's built to 5/8 scale, but it is fully functioning.
That's actually pretty cool.
It's very cool. That's the thing, is the attention to detail these Imagineers put in. It's incredible. Also, they really wanted, and we'll get into this a little bit more when we get to the section on building the park, but they were going for authenticity in all of this, so they didn't just build a boat that looked like a riverboat, they built a fully functioning riverboat. The drawbridge in the castle is an actual functioning drawbridge. They studied the way that they built drawbridges in medieval times, and they just built it again. It is a fully functioning drawbridge. The thatched roofs in Adventureland, they went and learned how to build thatched roofs, and they built them the old-fashioned way. It's incredible the amount of detail they put into the Disney park. And they all did it by hand, too. It's incredible.
That's cool. So there's some attractions that are still there. The riverboats and Sawyer Island are still major attractions today. Some things, however, in that drawing did not exist. It looks from the drawing like originally there was supposed to be a hot air balloon tethered to the center of the park that you could go up in. That does not exist. There also seems to be a little church in the map as well. And a lot of buildings that are built, including the castle, are built in a forced perspective view, which means that they look huge, and they are, but they look huge because as you build up, you make it smaller and smaller and smaller. And that makes it look taller because the smaller things are farther away.
Mm-hmm.
So the Sleeping Beauty's castle, at least in Disney World in Florida, the top of the towers are not big at all. They just look life size, but they're actually not big enough like the balconies are not big enough to stand in.
Yeah.
Well, we've covered a lot. So how about we take a quick break here, and we'll talk about building the park in our next episode and everything else there.
Yeah, that sounds like a good place to break.
Awesome.
Though, since it is the end of an episode, we can't just close without an etiquette tip, but since we're really just ending part 1, instead of going full etiquette tip, I have an etiquette fun fact.
Okay, let's hear it.
So, you cannot buy chewing gum in any Disney parks because Walt didn't want people stepping on chewing gum while walking around the theme parks because he wanted it to be a clean environment. He just made it a rule that they're not going to sell. It's not like they make you throw it out if you come into the park or anything, but they will not sell it. They never did back then, and they still, to this day, do not sell chewing gum in Disney parks.
I support that. I'm not a big gum chewer. We weren't really encouraged. I don't want to say allowed, because I don't think it was ever like against the rules, but we weren't encouraged to chew gum as little kids.
But anyway, so not a full etiquette tip, but an etiquette-related fun fact, which I always thought was really interesting. And I also support it. Because in addition to it just being on the ground to step in, people would just put it under all of the tables, probably, like under the park benches. Like, can you imagine?
I moved the desk in my classroom the other day, and I accidentally touched gum, and it was like,
no, blech.
So
anyway, but I think that's a good place to end part 1, and we will resume part 2 next week. Today, we're going to continue on our Disneyland history. So what?
Nope, I was going to just dive right in.
Dive right in. Okay, so originally, Disney wanted to build the park on a vacant 16-acre plot directly across the street from his studio. This was back when it was called the Mickey Mouse Park idea, which he's kind of conceptualized in 1948.
So the city of Burbank, where his studio is located, originally rejected the idea of Mickey Mouse Park, and the original concept was also strongly opposed by bankers, investors, and even some members of Disney's company. Even his brother Roy thought it would lead to financial ruin. So Disney financed the beginning himself by selling his vacation property and borrowing from his life insurance.
Eventually, Disney acquired 160 acres of orange groves and walnut trees in Anaheim, south of Los Angeles in the neighboring Orange County. He built the site adjacent to the new Santa Ana Freeway and just 38 miles south of Burbank, meaning that the park would be a short 30-minute drive from downtown. Fun fact about this is what seemed like it would be super convenient at the time ended up being a huge disaster because anyone who's been to Disneyland Park now knows just how close it is to the city is actually a flaw more than a feature these days because it just means locals could pop into the park for fun because it's just so convenient. So weekends and nights at Disneyland Park are a madhouse because people will just show up for dinner because it's just right next to town.
I've wondered about that because I've heard people be like, oh yeah, I had lunch at Disneyland the other day.
Yeah, it is overrun with locals, and I mean, good for them. I would do the exact same thing if I lived that close to Disneyland, but if you're saving up for a trip to Disneyland and it's your only time there in years, it is very overwhelming on nights and weekends.
Yeah, I always figured it would be like, when you live in cities that have touristy attractions, you never really go to those places unless you have like friends and family visiting
in town,
like
and you're like, oh yes, we'll of course go to the Met while you're here.
yeah, like no one that lives in Houston goes to NASA. We only go to NASA whenever we have family from out of state. Like, oh hey, you have space rockets here. I'm like, yeah, let's go. And it's always a fun time, but no one like, oh, you know what, it's Saturday morning, hey kids, let's get in the station wagon. No one drives station wagons anymore, but
well,
anyway.
Yeah, I don't know, Disneyland's just that much more interesting, I guess, is the answer.
So should we get on with how it was built? And
yeah, so getting back on topic, being that close, a short 30-minute drive from downtown did make Disneyland Park incredibly convenient. So once they settled on where they were going to put the park, construction began on July 18th, 1954, just a year before opening, and would cost $17 million to complete.
Wow.
So we talked a little bit about wet enterprises in the last episode, but basically Walt Disney handpicked his engineers and designers and the team he wanted working on this park, and the amount of craftsmanship that went into this theme park is no joke. Every single inch was built, sculpted, painted by hand. Since the park was so full of original ideas and old antique things from the turn of the century, they found experts where they could and just figured out the rest by experimenting with ideas. They tried to be as authentic as possible with all of the old-timey concepts and elements of the theme park, so the thatched roofs in Adventureland were authentically thatched by hand. The drawbridge in the castle is a functioning drawbridge made using plans that the original castles used in medieval times. The Mark Twain riverboat is an actual functional steamboat built to 5/8 scale, and it was the first functional steamboat to be built in the United States for 50 years.
So the river in Disneyland is obviously not a real river. Do you know if it's ever been moved? Like, could you pick up the riverboat, take it to like the Mississippi, plop it down, and not sink?
Actually, yes, I think you could, and also most of they didn't build a lot of the big stuff on site. They actually built it in different warehouses and built it to be put back together on site. They brought it over on trucks from different parts of California and reassembled everything in the actual park. Some stuff was built on site, but all of the really big things like the riverboat, the train, all of that was assembled in pieces and put together like a giant puzzle in Disneyland. So they could probably move the riverboat if they had to.
Yeah. I love the idea of it being real. There's a Pan Am museum in Ireland, out of all places, and they have a replica of the flying boats that Pan Am was known for before the jet engines. But the guy that built it, he's like, they asked him to build a like showroom piece to like have as their exhibit, and he's like, no, if we're gonna build it, we're gonna build it. And he built it. Like, he got plans and built it. It's not a functioning airplane, but it's built from the plans. And I kind of wish that it was functional. Anyway, sorry, tangent.
But one last authentic construction fun fact is that the railroad is actually a heritage railroad recreated from scratch, like old-fashioned railroads used to be built.
Oh, cool.
So they actually built the track, built the train cars. He wanted to get actually all original real train cars, but they ended up recreating a lot of them. For more details into just the incredible craftsmanship that went into this park, I highly recommend watching a pre-opening report from Disneyland, in quotes. That's the name of it. It is an episode of the Disneyland TV show that aired in July 13th, 1955, and it is streaming on Disney+. It's basically a final look at many details going into opening the park. Walt opens the special by showing the famous large park map, and he introduces Winston Hibbler, who narrates a behind-the-scenes tour of Imagineers designing and building the rides and the shows that are about to open. And that's where you see things like the train cars being built off-site and brought in by truck, and the pieces of the Mark Twain and all of that. figuring out how to waterproof the moat around the castle and the river that we were just talking about where the riverboat is. Like, they had to figure out how to do all of that because no one else had done it before. So
Wow.
it's a real celebration of the artists and all of the incredible hard work they put in. So I highly recommend watching that if you're into Disney history. So the tree opening report was July 13th, 1955. And in July 17th, 1955, is the official grand opening ceremony of Disneyland Park. It was meant to just be smaller opening to special guests and the media. So they had opening ceremonies and they were televised nationwide. And there was a whole dedication ceremony, a band playing the national anthem, and a flyover by the California Air National Guard. You can actually watch all of this in horrible quality on archive.org. I'll put a link in the show notes if you want to watch the opening day ceremonies. It is interesting.
Interesting. That's cool. Were there any issues, though, with opening day?
Oh boy, were there. So I mentioned that it was supposed to be just a small opening to special guests and the media. They were planning on there only being a crowd of 15,000 people because it was supposed to be an invitation-only opening. However, 28,154 people passed through Disneyland's gates thanks to counterfeit tickets. And even more hilariously, a couple people scaled the fence because some entrepreneur showed up and charged $5 a head for people to climb up his ladder and jump the gate. But they ended up calling opening day Black Sunday because just so much went wrong. They were famously painting and hammering right up to the actual opening of the gates. A few of the attractions, Rocket to the Moon, Peter Pan, and Dumbo the Flying Elephant, were not working yet. It was 100 degrees out and July, and the fresh asphalt on Main Street melted into a sticky mess, and some women lost their heels in the asphalt.
Sounds like Texas this summer.
Yeah, sounds like well, they're not used to that there. There was on top of all that, there was a plumber's strike happening, so the drinking fountains weren't working. The Mark Twain riverboat, which was ended up being filled beyond capacity, and it started taking on water and tilting. So basically, the opening ceremony was a huge mess. But it proved that his idea was popular and probably set up for success. Everyone seemed to have a good time, even though it was a huge disaster. And everything was just up from there. If you want to see how much it's flourished, another episode of the Disneyland TV show available for streaming is called Disneyland Around the Seasons from December 18th, 1966. At this point, the Disneyland TV show was renamed Walt Disney's Wonderful World of Color. This one is in color, and it looks so much more like the Disneyland park we know today. It is, you can tell that they are thriving. Since opening day, they have 60 million visitors come in those gates. The Matterhorn's there now, which opened in 1959. Basically, this episode is Walt taking us on a tour to point out the newest additions to the park. The newest attraction is It's a Small World, which just opened in May 1966. This episode spotlights It's a Small World, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, which is famous for the audio animatronic of President Lincoln. That the big deal about it is that he starts off sitting and then ends up standing while he gives a speech, which is a really cool thing for a robot to do in the 60s. And New Orleans Square is now a thing, which will later be home to the Haunted Mansion and the Pirates of the Caribbean, which are in development at this point, but not open for several more years.
I'll say the Haunted House is one of my favorite attractions, so listeners, be on the lookout, because who knows?
Maybe we'll do an episode about that.
Yeah.
One bittersweet thing that makes this episode particularly interesting is that it's the first episode of the Walt Disney TV show that aired after his death. He actually died 3 days before this episode aired. It's a little sad to watch, but it's still, you could tell how happy he is, and it's like a real celebration of how important this park is to so many people and just how interesting and beautiful it is. And it's really, it's especially if you watch the opening day celebrations and issues, and it's in black and white and all, like, the film quality is not great, and then all of a sudden here's this new special in 1966 and it's in color and it's flashy and there's the band and like it's really great to watch both of them. I highly recommend it.
Okay, I'm gonna have to put that on my list.
So one other thing that was interesting about the park in this time was, and that's very different than how it is now, is the ticketing system. So from Disneyland's opening day until 1982, you paid a very small admission fee just to get into the park, but to go on the rides and attractions, you actually had to buy tickets for them, either individually or in a book. So the ticket coupon books, the tickets were labeled A through C, originally anyway. A tickets were smaller rides and attractions like the horse-drawn streetcars on Main Street, and then C tickets were used for the common attractions like Peter Pan's Flight or the Mad Tea Party. You could actually combine coupons to equal the equivalent of another ticket, like 2 A tickets would be 1 B ticket. As more thrilling rides were introduced, though, like the monorail or the Matterhorn bobsleds, D and eventually E tickets were introduced. These days, actually, Disney nerds use the term e-ticket attraction to refer to the most in-demand attractions, even though we don't actually use ticket books anymore.
Oh, that's cool. So we're still using some of the stuff, some of the wording at least.
Yeah, in like press releases, they'll even say like a new e-ticket attraction, and you just know what it means if you know, you know.
Nice. So that's a nice little segue into talking about today.
So Disneyland, the park, still really feels like Walt's Park, and a lot of the original attractions are still running today. So the opening day attractions from July 17, 1955 that are still in operation are Autopia, the Disneyland Band, the Disneyland Railroad, the Jungle Cruise, the King Arthur's Carousel, the Mad Tea Party, the Main Street Cinema, the Mark Twain Riverboat, Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, Peter Pan's Flight, Snow White's it's Scary Adventures now, and the Storybook Land canal boats.
Nice.
Attractions that were built between 1955 and 1966 that are still in operation are the Casey Jr. Circus Train, Dumbo the Flying Elephant, Davy Crockett's Explorer Canoes, the Shooting Gallery in Frontierland, Alice in Wonderland, the Sailing Ship Columbia, the Dapper Dans, which are a barbershop quartet on Main Street, and they're awesome. The monorail, the Matterhorn bobsleds, the Enchanted Tiki Room, Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln, and It's a Small World.
I love the Dumbo ride, not necessarily like as a ride, but those of us who are familiar with the 90s will remember the Disney VHSs, and at the beginning of every Disney VHS, they always had like little like Disney World Studios or whatever it was, like little like come to our park promo, and the first thing you always saw was Dumbo.
Mm-hmm.
So
I feel that way about the Mad Tea Party, which I actually don't enjoy riding the teacups, because I just do a lot of eating at Disney parks, so that ride doesn't appeal to me very much. But the image of people like having fun spinning in circles in the teacups to me is like the theme park experience.
Yeah, I mean all these, I guess rightly so because they've been there forever. But Dumbo, It's a Small World, Lincoln, the Tea Party, Main Street, even like you think Disney parks, you think those bits and pieces. And like now we've grown so much, with the addition of Star Wars and stuff. Yeah. But I love that we still have these classic bits, these classic attractions still going.
Yeah, they've expanded a lot, but it's a very impressive list that I just rattled off of original attractions still functioning in Disneyland.
But this Disneyland's impact, or really Walt Disney's impact, is not just about how it impacted his park, because Disney changed how the entertainment sector viewed places like theme parks. Previously, they were either dirty or cluttered. Theme parks simply had flashy events and rides. Once the event was over, the customer was hastily ushered out to make room for the next customer. Disney wanted the opposite. We talked about it in the last episode, how he wanted a world where the guest, not the customer, was the center of the experience, and he wanted people to stay there as long as possible. And that's really big impact on today. Today, the whole entertainment business is centered around the customer experience, which is directly connected to the success of Walt Disney's first park, Disneyland. For more info on Walt Disney and the park, you can check out Walt Disney's Disneyland, a book by an architectural historian and theme park enthusiast named Chris Nichols. It's a really cool book. He talked about how Walt Disney came up with the idea from working with composers like Richard Sherman and the Imagineers, and how it made it to fruition.
And Disney's idea of the guest being the center of the experience, and he wanted them to stay as long as possible, is definitely still part of it today. Walt Disney World, which Disney was there to conceptualize it, but sadly died before it opened. But this time they learned from Disneyland and bought more land up. I mentioned in the episode, or I mentioned earlier, that it's just so close to the city. They kind of learned their lesson about that with Disney World, and they had, quote, the blessing of size. And now they actually are able to control the guest experience in the sense that the resorts, once you get to Disney property, you're just completely taken care of. You have buses that take you from the resort to the park, and from the park back to the resort. They used to pick you up at the airport and bring you back to the airport. It's just like a whole, once you're there, Disney controls your whole experience, and all of it's seamless and comfortable and happy. And that was all his original idea, and they're still trying to stay true to that today, which I really appreciate.
Yeah.
So, Gonzalo, have you ever been to a Disney park?
I have. I've been to both Disney parks in the States. I've been to Disneyland when I was little, and we did not live in the States yet. And we did a special trip to come to LA and went to Disneyland there. And then we did the same thing, Disney World. We came to Disney World, and then once we already lived in the States, we went to Disney World. I've never been to any of the Disney parks outside of the US. Although for a moment I was excited because there was a rumor that Disney had bought land between Austin and Houston for a park. I don't know. I have zero idea if that's true or not, but that was the rumor when we were in high school.
Yeah, I remember that rumor now. It would be nice if there was another park in the middle of the country.
It would, but Texas is hot.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, no one would want to go 6 months out of the year.
Yeah. Have you been to any of the million parks? I don't know, there's not a million, but
I have.
many.
I have. So I grew up in the Northeast, so we went to Disney World in Florida a lot. I used to go almost every year growing up for a while. I've been to Disneyland less, maybe 3 times ever. And it's definitely a very different experience. Like, you can tell that they're trying to keep, I mean, Disney didn't want anything to be a museum. He wanted it to always be changing, but they kept a lot of his original ideas intact and original attractions intact. And it really feels like you can feel the history when you go to Disneyland. It's very different than going to Disney World. I have also been to Disneyland Paris twice. But that was before they had their own studios park, which I hear is not doing very well. And all 3 of the Disneyland style parks, the Disneyland Park in Anaheim and the Magic Kingdom in Florida and Disneyland in Paris, all are true to Walt's original vision: single entrance, central hub with a castle, Fantasyland, Adventureland, Tomorrowland, and everything's just all in the exact same directions that you mentioned before. Like, Fantasyland straight through the castle, Tomorrowland's to the right. It's exactly the same. Like, no matter which one you're in, you know how to get around. It's amazing.
Nice. Have you ever been on a Disney cruise?
I have. I've been on several, actually. All of them on the Wonder, I think, because that's the one that leaves from Galveston.
Are there multiple ships?
Oh boy, are there? Yeah, there's. Oh shoot, I wish I had that off the top of my head. I can effort that if you stall.
Well, look for it, because so I love cruise ships. I think they're a great vacation. I've only been twice, but twice in the past 2 years. So when we were in the Alaska cruise ship over summer, we were docked. I forgot where it was, but we were docked in a little island that basically just exists for cruise ships. And I thought there was only one dock. I was like, oh, cool, we're the only people here. And we went through like the little attraction that was there, and all of a sudden we walk out of this like little shopping center, and it's packed. And I'm like, why is it packed? Well, come to find out that Disney Cruise had just docked. And they look really cool. I like that they look like old school ocean liners. Like Carnival and Norwegian are cool looking, but the black hull of an old school liner like Titanic, you can still see that in the Disney ships.
Yes, they do, and they all look like that. So there are 6 Disney ships. The Treasure is the newest one that will start sailings in 2024. I've been on the Magic and the Wonder, which are the 2 oldest ships. The Magic most of them leave from Port Canaveral in Florida, but the Disney Wonder comes to Galveston all the time, which is why I've been on that one more, because I can just drive to Galveston. Whereas the other ones, you have to fly to Florida and then get on the ship.
Yeah.
But the original, the guest is always right, full, beautiful customer experience is not quite as good in the parks as it used to be. Probably just because there's just so many crowds and it's just like a very overwhelming experience. But it's a little harder to feel like you're totally transported out into another universe while you're there, just because reality kind of slips in a little bit every now and then. But on Disney cruise ships, it is way more, you're definitely in a totally different, like, magical experience than it is when you're in the theme parks these days. So if you are a Disney fan, even if you do not have children, I highly recommend going on a Disney cruise, because it's incredible. They take care of you from the beginning to the end. There's Broadway-style shows. The food is delicious. They actually make it, I don't know if they do this on other cruise ships, because once we started going on Disney Cruise, we stopped going on other ones, but they rotate you around the restaurants so that you're eating in a different place every night, so that you're seeing the whole ship and you're trying all the food.
Oh, cool.
But your wait staff travels with you, so you can bond with them the whole time.
That's
and
cool.
They'll recognize your drink choices and who eats what bread from the bread bowl, so that they just like fill up the ones that they know you're going to eat, and they like learn your habits the whole trip.
That is cool. So in other cruise lines, I've traveled in Carnival and I've traveled in Norwegian. Carnival does the like seated tables, but you're always in the same restaurant though. But I love the idea of having a table. The first cruise I ever went on a cruise by myself. But it was cool because they sat me at a table with it was like a 6 top, and there were 4 people at the table. So like I saw them every dinner service, and then the waiter was the same guy every dinner service. So like you said, the Disney one, like they knew what we wanted, they knew how we wanted things. But Norwegian does it differently. Norwegian like is it's called free at sea, which is cool, but like you don't have a dining table. So like I've never been on Norwegian by myself, but I would imagine it'd be very different, because you are like, okay, today I'm going to eat at this dining room, tomorrow I'll eat at that one, and you basically just go to the hostess and like, hey, table for 4. But if you're by yourself, I don't know how that would work.
And they just seat you like it's a regular restaurant. That's interesting.
Yeah.
So like, are there dining times on Disney cruises? There's like, you either have early dinner or late dinner, and the idea is that like half the ship eats first and then goes and watches the show, and then the other half watches the show and then eats dinner afterwards.
Yeah, so that's how Carnival does it. Norwegian does like just whenever you want.
Fascinating. That sounds, yeah, I guess that everyone just kind of sorts themselves out that way. It's very free range. I like it. That's interesting.
Yeah. Free at sea. Sponsor us, Norwegian. But anyway, it sounds from this tangent like we are getting close to the end of this episode. So let's land the plane real quickly and talk a little bit about etiquette. So today's etiquette segment comes from a 1941 book, which is a little bit before mid-century as defined in our first episode. But the book is called The New American Etiquette. Jack, do you know there's a correct way to announce the birth of a baby? Or did you wait, did you even know people announce births of their kids?
I did know that people announce them. My sister just had a baby and she announced it.
Did she really?
Yeah, I have it on my fridge. She like sent out a card with a picture of the baby and proud parents and her birth weight and everything. Like it's a thing. But I didn't know that there was a correct way to do that. But I didn't know that it was a concept.
Yes,
I'm excited
there
to hear
is.
about the proper etiquette about it.
So it is the first social duty of parents of a newborn child to, quote, notify everyone who may be interested that the world's population has increased by 1, end quote.
Everyone who may be interested. I love that.
Yeah. There's no established formality. So telephone can be used. Post, meaning mail, may be utilized. This book from 1941 also recommends using the telegraph. So you could send a message to like a friend, right? Very informal. Say something like, Bill, it's a boy. Come get your cigar, Tom. Right? To a relative, it would be a little bit more, personal. Like, hey, Aunt Mary, John Henry Carter Jr. has just arrived. Everybody's well. Love, Mary and John. Like that would be a way to like send it to your relatives. And it is, according to etiquette, it is only necessary to announce the birth only to relatives and intimate friends. If you live far from your native community, or you are one of the Joneses in a big community, it's correct to notify the newspapers. Or you could notify an editor and let him make your secret public. Yeah. So what do you think about that etiquette?
The use of words like necessary are giving me pause. I don't think that you should be required to announce the birth of your baby, but I think if you want to, you absolutely should.
I love getting the announcements from like friends, because then I keep them and I frame them, and like I don't know, I like that. I don't know about opening up a newspaper. Although last time I bought the newspaper was when the Astros won the World Series. But I don't know about picking up a newspaper and like, I wonder who was born this week.
Yeah, I'm fine with the concept of a birth announcement. So,
Okay.
But I think that you should be able to opt into it. So I don't know. I don't know if that's an answer.
I'm in the same boat as you. Like I like the idea, but I think it's like a personal thing. Like friends, family, that's fine. I don't think we need to let Time Magazine know. I mean, unless maybe if you're like the King of England, then
Yes.
sure.
But I think it should be considered socially acceptable to announce the birth of your baby if you so choose to.
I think it should be socially acceptable. However, I don't know if I would give it the mid-century living stamp of approval, because I don't think it should be part of etiquette. I think it's just something you do if you want to do it, but there shouldn't be like social standards. Like the first social duty of a parent should not be to
tell everyone.
Let the world know. Yeah.
Yeah. The first
so that's
social
my
duty
stance.
should be to begin raising their child. So.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. So I am fine not keeping this as part of our current etiquette.
Okay.
Ooh, I think that's the first one we've decided not to keep.
I think so. You've heard it here first, ladies and gentlemen.
Only took us 6 episodes.
All right, everyone. Well, we've reached the end of Disneyland today. Please make sure you guys are following us on all our platforms. On Instagram, we are at MCL Podcast. And you can also email us at info.mcliving@gmail.com with comments, questions, future show ideas.
See you next week, everybody.
Thank you for listening to Mid-Century Living. Please subscribe, tell your friends, and leave a review. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can also follow us on Instagram at MCL Podcast. See you next Friday.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Remember that the best way to contact us these days is on Instagram at MCL Podcast. Send us a DM anytime. And please remember to subscribe or follow us on your favorite podcast platform so you never miss an episode. We'll be back from summer vacation with regular episodes again starting July 5th. Thanks for listening. Bye.